Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. And let's put this up here so I can see. Super. My name is Thea, and I am one of the coaches on the team here at Kathy Mazak's group. Sorry, notifications are still distracting. I hope that you either whether you're joining me live or you are watching this later, that I make sense. This is my first Level Up Live with you, although I've seen many of you in the coaching sessions. So welcome and thank you for joining me. I just want to get right in because there's some good stuff that I want to talk about, and I want to start with a quote that from Wendy Belcher's book. What is it? Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks or something like that. But I love what she said. She said, writing is to academia what sex was to 19th century Vienna. Everybody does it and nobody talks about it, which is one of the awesome things about Kathy's programs, right? We get to talk about writing. We get to talk about what works, what challenges we have, when we get it right, and celebrate with each other, right? That's one of the best parts as a coach, I can tell you. It's so fantastic to celebrate everybody's wins, and also to be able to come together when we struggle, which is also one of the best parts about being a coach, is to see how we come together as community and support each other. So in the interest of talking about the things that don't get talked about, I wanted to talk about something that comes up pretty regularly, and that is dealing with the emotional aspects of writing. What happens when you have set yourself up for a wonderful sprint, you have a plan, because planning is the easy part sometimes, right? I know others have identified with that. It's like really fun to set up every single detail of this great plan, and then you go off the rails and it's just gone, right? So you have this fantastic plan, and then you sit down to write, and you have all the feelings, and you just can't write. So what do we do with those feelings that get in the way? What do we do with the voices of self-doubt, with the trauma that some of us have experienced as writers, as thinkers, as people just living in the world? So one of the things that we talk about is writer's block, which is there's great debate about whether or not it's a thing, but that's a whole separate issue. I just want to lay out a few aspects of what it has been, and then I want to talk about some potential strategies and solutions. So writer's block, I love this definition, just hang with me. It was studied first by a psychiatrist named Edmund Bergler, and it was in the 1940s, and he studied what he called, I need air quotes for this, neurotic inhibitions of productivity. Isn't that just fabulous? I don't have writer's block. I have neurotic inhibitions of productivity. The language has just enough drama and outdatedness enough to make me need smelling salts, and I don't know, it just makes me feel very dramatic, which I enjoy. So Edmund Bergler was a Freudian analyst, so he, of course, prescribed unblocking through therapy, which is one potential way, right, to deal with some of what is surfacing for us, particularly those of us who have experienced trauma. I'm not necessarily a proponent of Freud, but therapy in general, we've come a long way since, so that's definitely one possibility. In 1970, Barrios and Singer, they identified 4 types of writer's block. And I think that these types sort of resonate, just to tease out some of the sources, right? Some of the root things that are holding us back. And let's see if these resonate with you. First is self-criticism. Anybody with me? Nothing you produce is good enough. That's how you feel, right? That's not reality. Nothing you produce feels good enough. This self-criticism, you're comparing yourself to everyone, you're comparing yourself to yourself, you're holding these incredible standards that are keeping you from performing in a way, you're just getting stuck in your own criticism. And our inner critic, right, we've talked about that, often does that. A second type was the fear of having their work compared to others. And what was interesting is that for some people that was criticism, right? We don't want our work compared to others and the other person to come out as, appearing better than ours. And the flip side was also true. For some people, they didn't want to be a source of envy. Me, not so much. You want to envy me because I'm a fabulous writer? Go right ahead, right? But for some people, the pressure that we put on ourselves because of that, or maybe pressure to be modest or to, not be out in the limelight, might seriously be something that stops us from producing our best work. The third type was lacking in motivation or creativity, which I don't think is the majority of people in our groups, although we all go through spells where we're just like, right? And that's also normal. If you are going through a spell, this will also hopefully help you to move through it and out of it. And finally, that fourth type was folks who are driven by external motivators. So they find it difficult to perform unless that external motivator is there. Unfortunately, grad school trains us to jump for external motivation constantly, and academia is structured a lot around external motivation. So that might be one of the things holding some of us back as well. One of the tools that they used was directed mental imagery, or visualization, which, as some of you know, happens to be one of my favorite tools as well. So really using those inner resources to get you into a place where you are flowing much better. One more piece of background I'll give is that the medical language refers to writing anxiety, and currently, this is contemporary speaking, and which is not as fabulous as the other definition, but writing anxiety resonates, right? It's defined as a stress reaction. And one of the things fueling our stress is what Barrios and Singer were hinting at, and that was expectations. The expectations we set for ourselves, as well as the expectations we project onto others. So the question is, how do we break through? How do we move past the, air quotes again, neurotic inhibitions of productivity? And I'm definitely tongue-in-cheek when I use that definition. One thing that successful writers have in common is the ability to hear their inner critic, respectfully acknowledge its points, and then move forward. You don't need to completely ignore the critical voice, but you also don't have to cower before it. And I think that is a difficult balance to strike, but I think that there's magic that happens when we're able to get to that place. Establishing that balanced relationship where your inner critic isn't really in charge, you're in charge. The fullness of you. And another thing to keep in mind is that writing is a habit. It comes out of regular practice. So how do we make peace with the inner critic, and how do we cultivate the habit of writing? I want to share a few tips that might work for you, and I would love it if you drop some in the chat, even though I can't multitask yet and read the chat while I'm speaking. But someday I'll get there. I aspire to that. So one major manuscript that I wrote as I was going through just excruciating shifts and changes. I was going through a career change, a complete field change. I was questioning myself, my career choices, my abilities, everything, my hairstyle, everything. You name it, I was questioning it. So I was not in a good place. But deadlines don't care sometimes if you're in a good place or not. I had an invitation to write this major project, and it was something I was passionate about, and I just knew I had to do it. So one of the tools that I recommend for facing expectations and your inner critic was really instrumental for me during that period, and it was keeping a journal. I keep a journal, and for this period of time, I would regularly journal about the worst things my inner critic said to me. I wouldn't bury them or try to brush them away. I would write them down. Sometimes just writing down what my inner critic said made me realize how ridiculous it was. Like, my inner critic is saying, like, oh, you have no style, you have no voice. I'm like, are you serious? Have you met me, inner critic? I got style. I got voice. So sometimes just writing that down would help me be like, no. But even when it didn't, I kept writing. All my fears, I would sit down and journal that out. Some days I would reason with myself and be like, no, these are the reasons why not. And some days I would cuss the critic out. In writing, I used Sharpies and crayons and made it very messy, because that's how I roll. Some days I would do a brain dump. Before starting my writing session, just everything out onto that paper so that I could start with a clear slate and maybe get some of that jumbledness, the noise out of there. Keeping a journal can help us, even if it's not usually your thing, it can help us to move through self-doubt, not just ignoring it, because what happens is that these thoughts will resurface, and sometimes you end up putting more energy into trying to ignore the voices, instead of doing the work of strengthening your confidence to deal with the negativity and really building up those muscles, beefing up. Another trick we can use when we feel stuck is to write something else. Write something unrelated. Maybe you have another project in your pipeline that you can give some energy into. Maybe you can write something different, like completely, like a poem, a bedtime story for your kids, an angry limerick to your inner critic, anything. That keeping that habit and that practice, even if it's not the project that you're still working on, giving yourself permission to shift gears for a minute, remember that you can write, and then come back to it can sometimes help. And speaking of writing projects, and you want to build yourself up sometimes, and one of the things I recommend is read something you've written in the past that you're really proud of, and read it with eyes of compassion. Don't read it to be like, oh man, I should have said it this way, because sometimes we do that too. But this is an exercise in really like celebrating yourself. You're not trying to re-edit yourself, so it helps to have a bit enough distance between the piece you wrote, so you're not like, oh. Reread your CV, right? I know I'm not the only one who goes through periods where I'm like, wait, I forgot I did all this dope stuff, right? Remind yourself who you are, because you are a writer and you've done all these things. Like, that is part of you, and no inner critic can take that away. That also helps to strengthen that writing muscle and that self-confidence that's ultimately going to bring you through. You can also talk through it with a trusted mentor or a colleague or a friend, especially those of us who are external processors, right? We think by putting our ideas out into community, we can work out some of the kinks that way from running into trouble. Pulitzer Prize and MacArthur Genius Grant winning historian Annette Gordon-Reed, she says that when the writing gets tough, it might mean that the research isn't fully baked. So her reaction isn't to just muscle through, but to ask questions and ask if she's done all the pre-work that she needs before pen can meet paper. So she says, when I have writer's block, it is because I have not done enough research or have not thought hard enough about the subject about which I'm writing. That's a signal for me to go back to the archives or to go back into my thoughts and think through what it is I'm supposed to be doing. For some of us, that might be the case, right? It might be a signal that there's a little more pre-work still to be done, and put some energy into that. Now, if none of these ideas so far have worked, some days the answer may be to give yourself permission to walk away. And I mean literally, walk away from it. Step away from your desk, go for a walk, go for a hike, go for a swim. Go be in your body, get out of your head for a little bit. And that movement can bring freedom back into your thinking, get some endorphins going as well, reduce some of that stress load that you're carrying, because we've all had a session where it's just an hour of like, you don't want that, right? So maybe there's a day where you're like, you know what, forget this, it's a beautiful day, I'm gonna go for a walk, and that is how I'm gonna use my writing time. As long as you are not doing that every day to avoid your writing, I think it's a fantastic strategy to get you flowing. Free writing can be another way to get yourself started, right? Just start writing, let go of your ideas about perfection, just write, do like a brain dump, just like set a timer and just write for the entire time, whether it makes a ton of sense or not, and you might surprise yourself. You might not, but you might surprise yourself by what you find. When you do that kind of exercise, a lot of it is there. It's percolating inside of you. And the most consistent thing that you can do is to build your habits. Habit will keep you going. When you feel like writing, when you don't feel like writing, when you're super inspired and pumped, and when you're Habit is going to be one of those things that you use to your advantage because you are accustomed now. You've carved out that time. You've made a commitment to yourself to keep showing up. You can build your momentum and use that to your advantage. You can join the Momentum Soaring sessions and co-write in community, and that will definitely help keep you going. The good news to all of this is that you've done this before, and you can keep doing it. Everybody goes through periods of self-doubt. The most award-winning, like decorated, highly read, fantastical people in any of our fields have gone through periods of self-doubt. There's no shame in it. I have to say that out loud. There's no shame in it. There's no shame in responding to trauma or grief that has affected our writing. There's no shame to any of it. We can lean on each other and we can learn from each other to keep on going in ways that sustain our practice rather than punishing ourselves or breaking ourselves down. It's okay to be human. It's okay to have good days and bad days. And you have the strategies in your toolkit to keep going. So, to wrap up my story, the project that I was working on, it got written somehow. It got reviewed, even though I had to deal with some really obnoxious comments. It got reviewed. It got edited. I did it. It's on its way to publication. Delays because of COVID, etc. But the point is that for me is it's not just the thing that I wrote, but it's something and an experience that I can pull off my mental shelf when I need a boost. This is what I did through terrible self-doubt. I still sat down, I still showed up, and I did the damn thing. So if you're struggling right now, or if you're struggling in the future and you want to make a mental note, give yourself permission to not be perfect. Recognize that this is a thing, whatever we call it, however we define it dramatically or not, it's part of being human. Make a plan and keep showing up for yourself. I would love to see your ideas in the chat, and I hope that we will keep learning from each other, keep showing up for those momentum sessions, keep writing, because you, yes you rock, and the world needs your voice. Thank you for joining me today, or whenever you are able to view this video. Keep going.